You didn't quit because you were weak. You quit because no one told you what was actually happening to you. Think about the last time something fell apart. A business, a relationship, a goal you'd been chasing for months. And think about what happened right after. Not the failure itself the moment after. You probably told yourself a story. I'm not cut out for this. Other people have something I don't. Maybe this just isn't meant for me. And here's the thing. You believed it completely because it felt true. It felt like evidence, like the universe confirming what some part of you always suspected. But what if that feeling, that sinking, crushing feeling of failing wasn't a verdict? What if it was a signal? Because right now, somewhere in the world, two people are going through the exact same failure, same circumstances, same loss, same devastation, and one of them is going to let it end them. And one of them is going to come out the other side almost unrecognizable, sharper, harder, more clear than they've ever been in their life. The difference between those two people isn't talent. It isn't luck. It isn't connections or resources or the right timing. It's what they understand about what failure is actually doing to them while it's happening. And nobody teaches you this. Not in school. Not from your parents. Not from the motivational content you consume at 11 p.m. trying to feel better about yourself. You're handed empty phrases. Failure is a stepping stone. Every no gets you closer to yes, but they never show you the mechanism. They never show you what's actually changing inside you when you go through something hard, so you keep failing. And instead of getting sharper, you just get more afraid. That stops today. There's an enemy in your life. And it's not the economy. It's not your boss. It's not the people who didn't believe in you. It's a belief system so deeply embedded you don't even recognize it as a belief anymore. It just feels like reality. The belief is this: failure means something is wrong with you. That's it. That's the whole thing. And it sounds almost too simple to be dangerous. But this belief is quietly dismantling people every single day. It's why smart people never try. Why capable people give up after the first obstacle. Why you can know exactly what you need to do and still not do it. Because somewhere along the way, you learn to fuse your failures with your identity. You didn't fail at the thing. You became a failure. Where did this come from? Think back. You were maybe 7 or 8 years old. You got something wrong in class. And someone, a teacher, a parent, another kid, reacted in a way that made you feel small. And your brain, which is designed to protect you, made a note. Being wrong is dangerous. Being wrong means rejection. Being wrong means you are less. That note became a rule. And that rule became a lens. And now, decades later, you're still running that same program. Every time you fail, the program activates. Every time something doesn't work, your brain searches for the familiar conclusion: there's something wrong with me. And here's what makes this enemy so effective. It disguises itself as self-awareness. People wearing this belief think they're being honest with themselves. They think their self-criticism is wisdom. They think their fear of failure is just being realistic. But it's not wisdom. It's a wound that learned how to sound like logic. The truly dangerous part? This belief keeps you from seeing what failure is actually doing. Because while you're sitting there deciding what your failure says about your worth, your brain is doing something else entirely. Something extraordinary. Something that only happens when things go wrong. But you can't see it, because the belief is in the way. You were never taught to look for the training. You were only taught to survive the shame. Here's what no one talks about: the psychology of being stuck. Not the advice for getting unstuck. The actual experience of it. The inside of it. You wake up and you already feel it. Before your eyes are fully opened, before your first thought is fully formed, there's a weight. It's not sadness exactly. It's more like a low hum of dread, like your body already knows this day is going to confirm the thing you've been afraid of. You go through the motions. You check your phone. You tell yourself today will be different. You pull up the thing you need to work on, and then nothing. You close the tab. You open something else. You tell yourself you'll start in an hour, then in the afternoon, then tomorrow, and the voice in your head is running the whole time. Why is this so hard for you? Other people aren't like this. You keep saying you want it, but look at you. You're doing it again? You always do this? That voice sounds like you. It uses your vocabulary. It knows your history. It brings up specific memories, that time you quit, that time you embarrassed yourself, that time you promised you'd change and didn't. And because it sounds like you think it's truth. But here's what's actually happening inside your nervous system. Every time you failed and then felt shame, your brain linked failure to threat. Not metaphorical threat, actual biological threat. The same system that fires when you're in physical danger. So now, every time you approach something that might not work, your brain sounds an alarm, and your body responds. Your focus narrows, your creativity drops, your access to rational thought actually decreases. You're not lazy. You're in a constant low-level threat response. And the cruel irony is this: the harder you try to push through it with willpower, the worse it gets. Because forcing yourself forward while your nervous system is screaming danger just reinforces the link. Now trying becomes the threat, so you avoid. And avoidance feels like relief, temporarily. And then the shame of having avoided hits, and the cycle starts again. You feel bad for failing. You avoid the thing that reminds you of your failure. You feel bad for avoiding. You tell yourself you'll start fresh tomorrow. You don't. You're not stuck because you lack discipline. You're stuck because you're running a protection program that's completely out of date. A program that was written for a version of you that doesn't exist anymore. And no one handed you the user manual, so you go looking for solutions. And the internet is full of them. Wake up at 5 a.m. Take cold showers. Do the hard thing first. Build a morning routine. Find your why. Visualize your success. Read the right books. Follow the right people. Say your affirmations. Get a mentor. Get accountability. Get obsessed. And maybe you try some of it. Maybe you try a lot of it. And for a few days, it works. You feel different. You feel the possibility again. And then real life happens. Something goes wrong. A distraction comes. You miss a day. And then everything you built collapses like it was made of paper. And you're left with something worse than before, because now you have evidence that even the solutions don't work for you. Here's the problem with all of it. These solutions treat the symptoms without touching the cause. They're trying to change your behavior without changing what your brain actually believes about failure. You can have the best morning routine in the world, but if your brain still believes that failure is a verdict on your worth, you will self-sabotage every time you get close to the edge of what feels safe, because your brain isn't optimizing for your success. It's optimizing for your survival. And failure in the language your brain learned is a survival threat. Hustle culture makes this worse. It tells you the answer is more effort, more grind, more output. But you can't outwork a belief that's operating at the subconscious level. You'd have to be running at full speed 24 hours a day. And even then, the second you slow down, the old pattern returns. And positivity culture makes it worse in a different way. It tells you just to reframe everything. Failure is a gift, but you can't think your way out of a feeling. You can't tell your nervous system to calm down and expect it to listen. The reframe sounds good in a YouTube video. In the middle of a real failure, it feels insulting, so people burn out, or they give up. Or, and this is the most painful version, they keep grinding without ever actually changing. They collect strategies and routines and never ask the deeper question, what do I actually believe is happening when I fail? Because until that belief changes, nothing on the surface changes for long. Now, here's where everything shifts. In the 1930s, Napoleon Hill spent years studying people who achieved extraordinary things despite extraordinary failure. People who went bankrupt multiple times and rebuilt. People who were told they'd never amount to anything and went on to change industries. And he kept finding the same pattern. These people didn't experience failure differently than everyone else. They interpreted it differently. They had a framework inside their mind that transformed failure from a verdict into data, from a dead end into a signal. And that framework wasn't something they were born with. It was something they built through deliberate, repeated, painful practice. Hill called it something close to this: every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. Not a greater lesson, a greater benefit. Something you gain that you could not have gained any other way. And here's what makes this idea more than just a nice quote. Neuroscience is now catching up with what Hill observed. When you experience failure and move through it without collapsing into shame, when you stay engaged with what went wrong and why your brain does something remarkable, it builds new neural pathways. It creates what researchers call stress inoculation. Your threshold for what feels threatening literally expands. You become someone who can handle more, not because life got easier, but because your brain physically changed. Failure isn't just teaching you about the external world. It's restructuring your internal one. The question that will change everything for you is this: stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start asking, what is this building in me? Those two questions lead to completely different brains over time. One question keeps you in the passenger seat, the other makes you the engineer of your own development. Drop a comment below. What's the failure you keep coming back to, the one that still has its teeth in you? Because I want you to start seeing it differently by the time this is over. So what does the actual system look like? How do you build the kind of mind that uses failure as fuel? It starts with a deceptively simple shift in how you define what failure is. Right now, most people are using a binary framework. Either it worked or it failed. Either you succeeded or you didn't. This framework is catastrophically wrong, not morally, but functionally. It strips 90% of the information out of every experience you have. Think about a scientist running an experiment. When the experiment doesn't produce the expected result, the scientist doesn't say they failed. They say they have data. And that data is often more valuable than a result that confirmed what they already thought. Because a failed experiment tells you something you didn't know. It narrows the possibility space. It points toward truth. You need to start treating your life with the same precision. Every failure is an experiment that returned unexpected data. That's not metaphor. That's literally the most accurate description of what happened. Something you predicted didn't happen, or something you didn't predict did. And hidden in that gap between what you expected and what actually occurred is information that could change your trajectory. But most people never mind that gap. They feel the sting, they tell themselves the story, and they move on or they stop. Either way, they leave the data on the table. The first rule of this system is this: after every failure, before you do anything else, you sit with the question, what did this reveal that I couldn't have seen without going through it? Not what went wrong, what was revealed. Because there's a difference. What went wrong leads you to look at surface events. The client didn't respond. The launch didn't convert. The conversation didn't go how you wanted. That's the surface. What was revealed goes deeper. Maybe you realized you were solving a problem that didn't actually exist. Maybe you realized you were pursuing something because you thought you should want it, not because you actually did. Maybe you realized your skill set has a gap you'd been pretending wasn't there. These aren't just lessons. These are navigational recalibrations, and you only get them through the failure. The second principle is harder, and most people resist it. You have to stop editing your failure history. Your brain is constantly rewriting the past to protect your sense of self. It minimizes failures that feel too painful. It reframes them into something more comfortable. And this sounds like a protective instinct, but it's actually devastating your development. Because if you can't look clearly at what actually happened, you can't extract what it was trying to show you. This doesn't mean punishing yourself. It means being a ruthless and honest observer of your own experience. It means sitting with the discomfort of I made the wrong call here, or I wasn't as ready as I thought, or I chose comfort over truth in that moment, and staying with it long enough to understand it, not just long enough to feel bad about it. The third principle is where this gets genuinely transformative. You need to understand the difference between a fixed capacity and a developing one. When you fail at something, your brain offers you two interpretations. One, you failed because you don't have what it takes. Two, you failed because you haven't yet developed what this requires. The first interpretation closes doors. The second opens them. And here's what's remarkable. The research shows that people who adopt the second interpretation don't just feel better about failure. They actually perform differently. They stay engaged longer. They try different approaches. They learn faster. They develop real competence in areas where other people plateau, not because they were smarter to begin with, because their interpretation of failure created a completely different behavioral loop. The fourth principle is about building what you might call a failure archive. Every significant failure you've been through has already changed you in some way. You're already not the same person who went through your worst moments. But if you haven't made that explicit, if you haven't traced the line between who you were before a failure and who you became after, then you can't access that evidence when you need it most. A failure archive is simply a record you keep, not of what went wrong, of what you gained, the skill you developed, the assumption you dropped, the clarity you found, the thing you stopped settling for. Every entry is proof that failure has already been training you. And when you're in the middle of a new failure, you can return to that archive and remember, I have been here before. And every time I've been here, I came out carrying something I didn't have when I went in. The fifth principle is the one that separates people who use failure from people who survive it. You have to increase your exposure deliberately, not recklessly, deliberately. This means taking on challenges where the probability of failure is real, not guaranteed real, where there's genuine uncertainty about the outcome. Because when you only operate in zones where you're confident you'll succeed, you stop developing. You're maintaining, not building. The counterintuitive truth of high performance is that the people who develop fastest are the ones who are most comfortable being in over their heads. Not because they're fearless, because they've built a relationship with failure that makes it feel like progress rather than punishment. And every time you choose the harder thing, the uncertain thing, the thing where you might fall flat, you're not gambling, you're investing. You're putting yourself in the conditions where your brain has no choice but to build new capacity. You hear all of this, and part of you agrees, part of you gets it. And then the old self shows up. It's subtle at first, a quiet voice, but what if I really am not good enough for this one? It sounds reasonable, prudent, even. It says things like, you failed at this specific kind of thing before. You don't want to go through that again, do you? And the thing is, it's not wrong about the history. You did fail. That did hurt. The voice has the receipts. What the voice doesn't have is the full picture. It knows your past, it doesn't know your potential. It knows what happened when you tried with the capacity you had then. It has no data on what you're capable of with the capacity you're building now. But it's loud and it's convincing. And it knows exactly which memories to pull up to make you doubt yourself. It's not a voice of wisdom. It's a voice of protection that hasn't been updated since the last time you got hurt. And this is where most people lose the fight. Not in the external battle, in the internal one. Because you can have the perfect strategy and the right information and the actual capability and still freeze, still pull back, still find a reason not to try. Because that old identity, the one built around avoiding the pain of failure, will fight for its survival with everything it has. It will make you tired right before the important thing. It will introduce doubt right when momentum starts building. It will convince you that your preparation isn't good enough, your timing isn't right, that one more piece of information is needed before you can move. The resistance is real. Don't underestimate it. but recognize it for what it is. It's not truth, it's friction. And every system worth having requires you to push through friction to access it. On the other side of that war is a version of you that is genuinely difficult to recognize from where you're standing now, not because they became someone else, because they finally became fully themselves. This version of you doesn't perform confidence. They have something quieter, an internal steadiness that doesn't depend on outcomes. When something doesn't work, the question isn't, what does this say about me? It's immediately, almost automatically, what do I do with this? That shift is enormous. You cannot overstate how different that makes life. Decisions come faster. Not because you stop caring about getting things right, because you trust that if you get it wrong, you'll learn what you need to learn. The paralysis disappears, not all at once, but progressively. Every time you move through a failure and come out with something useful, the next threshold for action drops. Your relationship with other people's opinions changes completely. When you're running on the belief that failure means something is wrong with you, other people's judgments feel like existential threats. You bend, you shrink, you perform, because rejection confirms the fear. But when you've been through real failure and mined it for what it had, when you have actual evidence that hard things have made you more capable, the judgment of someone who hasn't been through what you've been through starts to carry much less weight. Not arrogance, calibration, and perhaps most importantly, you start moving toward hard things instead of away from them, because hard things now mean something different. They're not threats to your identity. They're the conditions your development requires. Here's your challenge. Not tomorrow. Right now, while this is still in your body, think of the failure you've been calling your worst one, the one you've been carrying, the one that shows up when you're alone and honest with yourself. Now ask the question you've never asked it. What did going through that build in me that I couldn't have built any other way? Don't rush to an answer. Sit with it. Because there is an answer. There is always an answer. The thing you learned about yourself, the tolerance you developed, the false belief you lost, the direction you stopped wasting your life going in. Something changed in you. Something got built. And until you name it, it stays invisible. And you keep treating that failure like a wound instead of what it actually was. The people who go furthest in life aren't the ones who failed less. They're the ones who learn to read their failures like a language. You've been through enough already to be further along than you realize. The question is whether you're willing to look at what all of it was actually building. If this hit something real for you, tell me in the comments what's the failure that's actually been training you. I want to see your answer. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is the kind of thinking we go deep on every week. Hit subscribe, you belong here.